Hello, my name is Barb Byrum, and I am the Ingham County Clerk in the state of Michigan. I've run 30 elections and have been the chief elections official in my county for nearly 9 years. Unlike some states, Michigan county clerks are elected partisanly every 4 years. Elections in Michigan are also decentralized. So while I perform the programming for the election equipment and accept some candidate filings and enforce campaign finance laws, it's the local clerk, city and township clerk, that is responsible for the day of running the election. Keep in mind, there are over 1,500 local clerks in the state of Michigan. Those local clerks are responsible for hiring precinct workers and distributing ballots to voters. Prior to my time as an election official, I served 6 years in the Michigan House of Representatives and owned and operated a hardware store for nearly 20 years. I've been fortunate enough to be involved with DEF CON Voting Village for a number of years. And thank you for the opportunity to speak with you again, albeit virtually this year. Thank you for your participation in DEF CON Voting Village, because through your activism, election administrators like me will forever be positively impacted. I thank you for sharing your knowledge and being engaged in Voting Village. As a result of things that I have learned from you, I have established additional security practices and am focused on continuing to mitigate the risk and maintaining a close working relationship with my IT department. I remember my first DEF CON that I attended. I was absolutely terrified, and I didn't even know what to be afraid of. Little did we know then, just a couple of years ago, that one of the largest threats on our republic was going to be the President of the United States and his inability to admit defeat. So let's set up the 2020 election and the experiences we as election officials have had in Michigan. Back in 2020, August of 2020, Trump claimed that if he did not win the election, it would be rigged. Media entities and that sided with the president parroted his claims. His surrogates and family members criticized election administrators, and he sent out many social media posts before he was banned that indicated his victory was inevitable and that the deck was stacked against him if the unthinkable happened. Late on November 3rd or early November 4th, 2020, with absent ballot counting, sometimes referred to as mail-in voting, not yet completed in several battleground states, the president declared victory. In-person ballots had been tabulated and results were reported. They favored the president, which was less than surprising given that he had been downplaying the severity of the COVID-19 outbreak to his supporters and sowing seeds of skepticism towards absentee voting. Biden's supporters, meanwhile, favored absentee voting, mail-in voting, and early voting as safer options. The larger urban areas, typically leaning Democratic, like the city of Detroit in Michigan, were still counting the large volume of absentee ballots they had received. Days later, shortly after the winner of the November general election was announced, conspiracies began popping up in the darker corners of the internet. These included whether or not Sharpies were being utilized in predominantly Republican-leaning precincts because they somehow invalidated ballots. This is not true. In fact, Sharpies are usually the preferred ballot marking device for optical scan voting machines. There were allegations of vote dumps in the wee hours of the morning. Nope, not true either. What they probably saw was the upload of larger jurisdictions' results. You know, the ones that had more absentee ballots to count and probably could not finish by the time polls closed on election day, being added to the reported results. In Ingham County, we were still receiving election results from our largest city at 6 o'clock in the morning on Wednesday, November 4th. And quite frankly, I was surprised it was that soon. In Michigan, we're not allowed to feed absentee ballots into tabulators until polls open on election day at 7 a.m. local time. This means that local clerks are not permitted to begin tabulation until 7 a.m. Typically, this means completing everything from opening the ballot to verification of the ballot number assigned to the voter while the ballot is still inside the secrecy sleeve to maintain the secrecy of the vote, to removal of the ballot stub, to the removal of the ballot from the secrecy sleeve, to flattening the ballot, and finally to feeding that ballot through the tabulator. For November election, the Michigan legislature gave local clerks a morsel of assistance in the form of allowing clerks in jurisdictions with populations of more than 25,000 to open the outer absentee ballot return envelope on the day before the election. So there was still a great amount of work to be done come 7 a.m. on election day. There were also allegations of 138,000 ballot dump for Biden. But let's be clear, that was an extra zero that was added when the vote totals were manually typed into a state database. It was quickly corrected, but not quick enough for fake news to travel. Election challengers claimed ballot delivery trucks arrived from goodness knows where to the TFC Center in Detroit. This theory, too, was proven incorrect. Voters who requested an absentee ballot in Michigan have until 8 p.m. on election day to return said ballot. There are drop boxes all over the city of Detroit that accepts absent voter ballots, which all had to be checked at 8 p.m. on election day. Once the ballots were retrieved from the drop boxes, they had to be returned to the clerk's office, where they were marked return in the voter file, and the signature on the outside envelope was compared to the signature in the voter file. Plus, they were probably being sorted by precinct, of which there are hundreds in the city of Detroit, for easier and more efficient and secure processing. Only then could they be delivered to the absent voter counting boards, where they can go through the process of opening that outer envelope, verifying the ballot number assigned to the voter, removing the ballot stub, removal of the ballot from the secrecy sleeve, flattening the ballot, and finally to feeding that ballot into the tabulator. Oh, and man, with the mysterious wagon full of ballots in Detroit was from a local news station. So that man was a reporter. Another conspiracy was that something screwy was going on in Antrim County, Michigan. Again, not the case. Antrim County, Michigan reported that Biden beat Trump, which prompted the Trump team to claim a software glitch. And baseless claims that Dominion Voting Systems election computer malfunctioned spread around the nation. The truth is, the problem was human error, as the tabulator programming and the ballots had been updated to include some late added candidates, which did not match the programming on the computer that accumulated the results. Therefore, vote totals were not properly awarded to the proper candidate. The county clerk worked with the county board of canvassers to certify the proper results. This was able to be done because, one, the tabulators read the ballots properly and printed the correct report on election night, and two, Michigan has paper ballots that can be reviewed. A full hand recount of the county's paper ballots also showed that the certified election results were correct. Trump did, in fact, win Antrim County, Michigan. The barrage of theories around the foundation of our democracy has left a large swath of the American population frustrated and sometimes outraged over what they perceive to have happened. With a calming word from trusted leaders, the mistrust and disbelief may have faded away, and the election a distant memory. However, for months, Trump and his compatriots sought to rile up crowds and stoke the fires. Trump sent Rudy Giuliani to Michigan to take part in a kangaroo hearing about the November 3rd election. After weeks of perpetuating these falsehoods and bullying officials like the Georgia Secretary of State. You may even recall the Saturday Night Live skit, and I wish I could say the real hearing was more serious. Mr. Giuliani and his associates spent 5 hours repeating these conspiracies without much credibility. Unfortunately, a lot of the testimony from that hearing, which was not under oath, boiled down to people who did not understand the elections process and who were upset about the result of the election and observed it with a negative bent. Our election officials are under attack. There were claims that There were tabulation errors in Rochester Hills, which again turned out to be human error of a file being sent twice to the county clerk for the purpose of reporting unofficial election results. It was corrected the morning after Election Day. The vile messages and threats that local clerk received after setting the record straight certainly contributed to her leaving her post abruptly and seeking employment elsewhere. The Brennan Center for Justice put out a report last month about the attacks election officials have faced. It states that 1 in 3 election officials feel unsafe because of their job, and almost 1 in 5 listed threats to their lives as a job-related concern. The video that accompanies the report is eye-opening to the attacks my colleagues have experienced over the past 8 months, and even longer than that. When our election officials are under attack, our democracy is under attack. Now I'd like to play this video for you real quick.
He will demand the truth, and you will pay for your lying remarks, you liberal lying rhino. We will take you out. Your family, your life, you watch your back.
They had assault rifles.
A pipe bomb.
You're gonna get what's coming to you.
They threatened my life.
Couldn't go anywhere without the police officers.
When we had officers on the roof of our building.
I'd never had people so engaged and enraged about what we were doing just to ensure that people could vote.
We had go bags ready for my family and my children.
The biggest problem we have right now are the ballots. Millions of ballots going out. What's going to happen on November 3rd when somebody's leading and they said, well, we haven't counted the ballots. We have millions of ballots to count. It's a disaster.
That was picked up by his political allies and perpetuated against election administrators.
This, to me, was an effort to undermine confidence in our entire electoral process.
The national narrative was no early voting, make them go to the polls. You know, you can't trust absentees.
There was certainly unfamiliarity with the process, and people took advantage of that. People exploited that to try to make people question the validity of the system.
And what they were doing was, again, trying to discredit the results if they didn't turn out. And the bullseye was on us.
There were people who showed up outside of election officials' houses, armed, people that showed up outside of offices, threatening phone calls, harassment.
And online discussions about types of ammunition and guns to use on me.
It became a daily occurrence outside of our facility to have anywhere from 50 to 150 individuals outside. Some of them were armed.
There was a fence sort of separating the building from the protesters. And they were armed.
I was walking up the street to the park. This big Caucasian guy came up to me out of his car and he said, I've been waiting for you, Miss Winfrey. I want to know why you cheated during the election. I want to know why Donald Trump lost. It's your fault.
We were terribly concerned about every threat, everything that was said, because we just didn't know.
I was encountered with a partisan operative campaign manager with his cell phone where he videotaped me hurling insults and accusations. It had over 400,000 views. Commenters were saying we should find out where she lives. We should hang her for treason. She should be shot.
This is not what I expect to have to really run and fight for my life.
We think about that happening in other places around the world, but that's happened in the United States, and it's happened specifically because of the big lie.
This is going to be a fraud like you've never seen. The only way we're going to lose this election is if the election is rigged. It's going to be fraudulent. It's going to be fraud all over the place. Who's getting the ballots? Who's sending the ballots? This is stealing millions of votes. This is a rigged election.
made the decision to go with an all-mail ballot for the primary election.
We had to redo pretty much the entire way that Philadelphia votes, and we only had a couple weeks to do it.
I mailed all applications to all registered voters in the city of Detroit.
Government and industry representatives from the election security community issued a joint statement reflecting a consensus perspective that the 2020 election was the most secure in U.S. history.
We actually had record number turnouts of people that came out in a pandemic.
Everything that you had written in a playbook as far as like how you normally do things in an election cycle had to be set aside.
We had no idea that we would be having to purchase personal protective equipment at a time when none was available.
We had a lot of senior facilities, churches that were not even open to their own congregations, let alone open their doors and let several hundred people come in and vote.
As you're hearing, the country is seeing record turnout in early voting. Americans waiting in lines for hours, even braving pouring rain to make their voices heard.
We had a camera in the convention center with a live feed for the network could tap into at any time.
And it was a massive operation, again, 24 hours a day, hundreds of people.
It was very surreal.
We had people coming and signed up to work that November election cycle who had never worked in an election ever before. And a lot of them were people that were college age.
The work that my team did to run this election is about as good as any team in the United States of America has ever done.
Election officials are in this for passion, for service.
They don't do this job to get rich, and they care more about the integrity of elections than anyone I know.
That feeling that you get when elections are over on election night and everything has worked according to plan is a feeling that I can't just describe.
It is so much more than just an exercise we do every 6 months. It's our fundamental right.
And we know that when more people participate, the better off we are.
There is a lot that can be done to help educate lawmakers, educate the public about the process.
Leaders have made it comfortable to be racist, to be so partisan.
It needs to be a bipartisan effort, and there needs to be leadership who's willing to support what we do.
We all need to work together to stop the misinformation.
At its core, America is good. We are good people.
This isn't about how you feel. It's about ensuring that every American who has the legal right to vote gets to exercise that right and participate.
Law enforcement do not seem to be taking these threats seriously. Over 75% of election administrators in the US are women. These public servants are being bullied, threatened, and ran out of office. This is happening to Democrats, Republicans, independents, nonpartisan, appointed, and election officials, and it has to stop. Just recently, the FBI announced that they will be investigating and prosecuting threats against election workers. I am grateful that these threats are being taken seriously, but saddened that it has come to this point. I am afraid that this will become our new normal. As a matter of fact, just earlier today, in response to an email reminding voters to turn in their absent voter ballots, a local clerk was told that if he emailed that particular voter again, he was going to slit his throat. Lawsuits across the nation have been plaguing election offices. Michigan, like many other states, have seen countless rallies and lawsuits crying fraud due to these already debunked conspiracies. Legislators and legislatures at both the state and federal level have called for the election to be overturned. Then others joined a Texas lawsuit that would have upended the electoral college process. Let us not fail to note the proposed legislation that has been introduced in the majority of states in the United States, reportedly to combat the election fraud. At least 389 restrictive election bills have been introduced in state legislatures across the US. Michigan has seen a 39 bill package introduced in the Senate that was written by the Heritage Action Fund and disseminated to Republican caucuses across the country. These bills sought to restrict the vote, suppress the vote, and disenfranchise the voter. Those pushing back against the misinformation bills are being targeted in future elections. We are already seeing that in Michigan, with a Secretary of State candidate attending the Arizona audit and people who are behind numerous election lawsuits and fraud rallies running for Attorney General. Let's talk about what's happening in Arizona. I refuse to call what is happening in Arizona a true audit, because what we are seeing are partisan election review exercises by unqualified individuals with little to no transparency. The one we are witnessing in Arizona is being pushed across the nation in places like Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and even Michigan. Election officials in Arizona have to spend more time creating websites to respond to baseless, inaccurate claims and less time serving the voters. This is causing our election equipment to be decertified due to unauthorized access. In fact, the systems in the Arizona case were taken to another state and subject to unknown compromises. These exercises are just perpetuating the conspiracy theories without actually consulting experts or doing anything to improve election process or experience. In Michigan, we even have a sheriff investigating election officials now. One Michigan county sheriff is also taking it upon himself to conduct an investigation into the election, going so far as to hire a private investigator and harass local clerks into giving them access to their election materials or straight up seizing the election equipment. We're seeing more and more election administrators leave the field. In 2020, nearly 35% of election officials would be retirement age by 2024. The institutional knowledge that will leave with them is going to be devastating. Not to mention who will be taking their place when the people have watched election officials get harassed, and it's already a thankless job. Those that are pushing the conspiracy theories will be running for those positions. We may not see the real impact, at least in Michigan, until 2024, when county and township clerk offices are up for re-election. We have to do more. We have to stay engaged, fight back against these conspiracies. That is how we hack them. It is not all doom and gloom. The Michigan Senate Oversight Committee put out a report after numerous hearings and investigations that concluded there was no fraud in the November general election, and the certified results were accurate. One can only hope that people in places of power standing up to the conspiracy will pave the way for others to do the same. Election integrity, the security and sanctity of the vote is of paramount importance. The federal government knows this, as election administration was deemed critical infrastructure back in 2017. So what else can we do to protect the future of our elections? Demand that our elections continue to follow the most secure protocols, that every voter votes in the least hackable way possible with a paper ballot. Hold those politicians who would undermine our democratic system of government accountable. Stand up for a free press and the safety of members of the media. We must demand that those that threaten the media and election administrators are held to the fullest extent of the law. Get more involved in the process of election administration. Sign up to work in election as a precinct inspector. Work in absent voter counting board. Learn as much as possible about our elections, because the more people with knowledge of how the process works, the more people will be assured that it is working the way it is supposed to. Call on those with skills to help us keep elections safe and secure. Election officials are not usually cybersecurity experts, but we must work with government agencies to bolster our defenses against cyber attacks. Again, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you this year. Please join me in fighting back against mis, dis, and malinformation, whether that is by reporting false social media posts or learning for yourself if something is accurate before amplifying the message. I welcome and appreciate your assistance. 2022 and 2024 are right around the corner, and we must be ready with the tools to secure our elections and fight back against unsubstantiated election conspiracies. So please, reach out to your election administrators, introduce yourself, offer to assist as a precinct or poll worker, develop that relationship, and take the opportunity to suggest election security measures, mitigation actions, report mis and disinformation on social media. If you read something about an election or an election administrator or how things are done, ask your clerk or other trusted administrator if it's accurate before amplifying that message. Continue to work towards safer, more secure election and a more perfect union. Again, thank you so much for joining me. Please feel free to contact me if I may ever be of assistance to you. My email is clerkbyrum@gmail.com. My Twitter handle is @Barb Byrum. Thank you and have a great DEF CON.